Hi, everyone. My name is Eva. I'm 20 years old, and someone tried to kill me recently. Let's start with the fact that I have been a member of a brotherhood of rock climbers for a year. For most of this year, I've been enjoying climbing with people who are as crazy about it as I am, but my equipment failed me a few months ago. I fell from a high altitude. If I'd had time to climb a little higher, I would have lost my life altogether. But I was extremely lucky, so I got away with bruises, abrasions, and a crack in my leg. Everyone thought it was an accident. Everyone except me. The thing that bothered me was that a few hours before we started climbing, I double-checked my equipment, and it was in the proper condition. I was convinced that someone damaged my equipment on purpose. I spent some time in the hospital, and my rock climbing friends visited me, but as soon as I got out of the hospital, everyone was a suspect to me. I had a best friend named Eric. He climbed with me as well, and he was the only one I talked to about my suspicions. Eric was sure that none of our friends would have arranged anything like that, but he still agreed to be my Watson. That's what best friends are for, to help you in any situation. The first person who Eric and I started investigating was Cynthia. The thing is that I kind of stole her boyfriend, Chris, about 6 months ago. At that point, her desire to get back at me was the only logical move we could find. So Eric and I started checking out our guests. I am saying this as a true detective. The reason I started my investigation with Eric's help and not Chris's is because Chris was not part of our rock climbing crowd. Well, not exactly, as it turned out later. So we went to Cynthia's and started throwing accusations at her. Surprise was our only weapon. My beloved Chris heard us shouting and ran out of her kitchen. As it turned out later, he had gotten back together with Cynthia behind my back quite a while ago. Chris even wanted to break up with me, but he decided to wait for a better opportunity to do so because of my injury. I'd rather not tell you what happened next, but Cynthia's hallway was ruined. Nevertheless, I pulled myself together at some point, I can't even say that, and remembered the reason I was there. My first guess failed because Cynthia no longer had any motivation for revenge since she had already gotten back at me by having Chris back. But thanks to Cynthia, no matter what, because she gave me a new lead. According to her, she noticed that Barry, one of the climbers, started watching me very closely a few months before the incident with my equipment. It wasn't much, but it was like finding any port in a storm. I was very stressed because of my sudden breakup, so Eric and I went straight to the pub after leaving Cynthia's place. Thank God I almost stopped thinking about Chris after a couple of glasses of some liquor and we could continue our investigation. Eric invited Barry to a friendly meeting the same night, to the same pub. We got more and more into our roles as detectives, so we decided to ask questions unsuspiciously rather than directly. Prior to Barry arriving, I moved to a different table and observed everything from a distance. Plus, Eric called me and put his phone in the front pocket of his shirt so I could hear the conversation. Anyway, Eric and Barry had a drink, and when the right moment came, Eric casually asked him about my equipment. It was just the beginning of surprises that night. It turned out that Barry hadn't done anything wrong to me. He simply couldn't have, and it was because he was secretly in love with me. The only reason he was watching me was because I already had a boyfriend, and unlike me or Cynthia, Barry was a decent person, so he didn't act on it. The news was flattering, but didn't help our investigation. But thank God, at the end of the evening, Barry did give us a lead. It turned out that one day he saw Janine, another rock climber, discreetly take my water bottle and spit in it. These are the kind of details that come up when you start examining your surroundings under a magnifying glass. It was already too late by the time we were done with Barry, so our investigation had to pause until the next day. Eric proved to be the best ally when he had a conversation with Janine. Everyone knew that she liked him. Even Eric himself knew it. So in order to get information from her, he went up to Janine with a bottle of wine, just like on a date. We pulled our phone trick for the second time, so I stayed home and just listened to my secret agent doing his work. Poor thing had a tough time, if you could have only seen Janine. But working undercover bore fruit in the end. She admitted that she hated me, and the reason for it was simple. It turned out that our friendship was in the way of her dating Eric. Well, one time Eric stood her up because he was meeting up with me and she couldn't handle it, so she spat in my bottle. Long story short, Janine is not okay. But nevertheless, she said that she didn't rig my equipment, even after being alone with Eric under the influence of wine. We didn't have any evidence, so we had to take Janine's word for it. I don't know how their night ended, but I met up with Eric the next day and told him about a new idea of mine. It's amazing that we didn't think of this one right away, but about an hour before my climb started, everyone was minding their own business except William. He was supposed to keep track of the climbers' belongings, so we immediately went to see him to ask if he had seen anything unusual. At the time, he was at the gym, so that was where our communication took place. Judging by his words, no one touched the equipment, but there was one important detail. Right before our climb, everyone gathered for a group photo. William was in the picture as well, so nobody was keeping an eye on our belongings for a solid 10 minutes. That means there was time for the attacker to ruin my equipment after all. Eric wasn't smart enough for some reason. He was thinking of something totally wrong. But for me, a now self-proclaimed young Sherlock Holmes, everything was clear. The main suspects were the people who weren't in our group photo. And I've never logged into Facebook with such interest. Examining the photo that was on our fellowship page, it was clear that two people were not in the picture, Ray and Stuart. To be honest, I don't know what motives they might have, but it was a direct clue. I felt like I was getting close to the truth. We went to Stuart at first. We wanted to call him and arrange a meeting, but he wasn't picking up for some reason. We went to his place after 6 p.m., but surprise, he wasn't home. Everything seemed weird, including the fact that Stuart's house looked abandoned, like no one had lived there for a long time. So we hung out and waited for Stuart for a couple of hours, but he didn't show up. He became our number one suspect at the moment, but we didn't know where to look for him, so we decided to check our second guess and went to Ray's. And you know what? Once we got to Ray's house, I thought that a whole organized criminal group was behind ruining my equipment because Stuart's car was parked right next to Ray's. The tension increased. I even thought about calling the cops, but when Ray let us in, we saw something that made our suspicions disappear immediately. Ray and Stuart were wearing silk robes, and it seemed that there was nothing else under these robes. We were very impressed, to say the least. Long story short, these guys confessed that they'd been dating and that they'd lived together for the last 6 months. They just thought that they weren't as close enough with our Climber Brotherhood members to come out to them. And well, they also had a reason for not being in the picture. As Ray explained, we went to kiss for good luck. That was an unexpected turn. And we were even supposed to be happy for these guys, but there were no more suspects, so Eric and I reached a real dead end. We went to the same pub where we had questioned Barry earlier. I started to worry that one of the people we interviewed had lied to us and that we would never find out at that point. It could have been William, who we didn't spend enough time questioning, or Janine, since we believed her words so easily. In fact, we took most of the people at their word, so it could have been anyone, to be honest. I was desperate at that point. I even thought that it could have been an accident and that our whole investigation was in vain. But then I looked at the group photo one more time and saw an interesting detail that I hadn't noticed until now. Eric also wasn't in our photo. He denied everything and made excuses at first, but due to the shock and stress, he started getting confused. So finally he confessed that it was him who ruined my equipment. You can't even imagine what it felt like to find out that your best friend almost killed you. And the excuse was, well, it was incredible. It turned out that he'd been in love with me for a long time and I simply did not notice it. I truly did not even think about it. His plan was that he would ruin my equipment, climb beside me on the rock, heroically catch me when I fall, and then win my heart as my savior in the end. But you know how it really happened. I don't know what happened. Maybe he just missed the right moment or simply didn't have time to grab me, but I ended up in the hospital. My first reaction was anger. I didn't expect him to be so stupid. But the fact that he was lying to me all this time was even more painful. In a moment of anger, I threw a beer glass at him, shouted a lot of nasty things, and said that I did not want to see him ever again. He tried to apologize, but I threatened him with the police. And it was only then that he left. We didn't see each other for about a month, and I think it was the right thing to do. But sometimes I think it would have been much